Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I am your host, American 3071, and this channel will serve as an alternate history platform for anyone interested. I will go through potential alternate histories and discuss them in a story format. This channel is being made to help fulfill my passion for history, as well as inform people of my book series, which I will get into at the end of the video. For now, I would like to begin this channel with an interesting scenario. The plague weakened India, being more aggressively colonized by Britain. To start this scenario, we need to go back to the 14th century, when the Black Death ravaged Europe and the Middle East. At the time, this plague spread across the Silk Road trading routes and devastating entire regions, bringing many nations to their knees. India was, in our timeline, able to weather the plague better than most. Records are scant, but it is suggested that the plague affected no more than 10 to 20% of India's total population, thanks to their more spread out geography. In our alternate timeline, we need to adjust a key detail, namely, that the plague never hit India. It is possible for this to happen, as any travelers heading to India needed to pass through the Hindu Kush and other mountainous regions of what is today Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Perhaps in this timeline, plague containment enforcement combined with difficult mountainous terrain makes any traveler with the plague unable to cross into India without dying first, helping to protect the subcontinent and bolstering its population growth. As the centuries pass, India has a larger population than in our timeline, a roughly 20 to 30% increase. When the British come to colonize, they are wholly unaware of India's weakness to the plague. We shall now fast forward to 1798, when Richard Wellesley, 2nd Earl of Mornington, arrives in Calcutta as Governor General of India for the British East India Company. Just like in our timeline, Richard has intentions of conquering the rest of India. His reasoning stems from a new faction within British politics that seeks to civilize the rest of the subcontinent and rid it of its feudal elements. There is also a growing concern that the reforms being implemented by Indian states, such as Hyderabad and Mysore, will result in stronger Indian forces capable of fully repelling any British invasions. Richard is, however, opposed by a faction in British government that favored the status quo, namely those known as the mercantilists. To sum up their position and make things easier for you all to understand, these people opposed any more expansion into India, seeing it as costly and unnecessary. The two sides in the British government also had opposing views regarding the monopoly of the East India Company and free trade, but for simplicity's sake, we will not be focusing on these economic issues too much, and instead get down to the important things in this alternate timeline. As I mentioned before, Richard arrived in Calcutta in 1798 to oversee all of British India. His intentions were to spread Britain's territorial holdings on the subcontinent, but he needed an excuse to do so, otherwise he could risk angering the mercantilists and finding himself being recalled by Prime Minister Pitt. So Richard got set to work. He initially began to target the Sultanate of Mysore, a South Indian state that was most interested in reforming their armies and system of government to match the British. So naturally, they needed to be taken out first. It was at this moment that two critical events are to occur. First, and unbeknownst to Governor Wellesley, a few infected rats stowed on his ships are to offload into Calcutta and Madras, the latter being a stopping point in southern India before the main destination of Calcutta. These rats had come from Portsmouth, England, where not only Wellesley's voyage had departed from, but where a mild localized outbreak of the plague had occurred among the lower classes. The second critical event, given directly to Wellesley on a silver platter, metaphorically speaking, was the flight of the heir of Hyderabad, a South Indian state just north of Mysore. He had been ousted by a rival with the support of the Hyderabad sepoys, or Hyderabad's professional army, as most Indian states were transitioning from feudalism. The Nizam of Hyderabad promised to be a vassal state of Britain in return for having his throne restored, which Wellesley agreed to immediately. He then sent his own sepoys from Madras to go in and seize the territory, which they did without a fight. All the while, several infected sepoys unknowingly spread the plague to the Nizam. It's at this point that the monsoon season ends, allowing for the rapid spread of the plague, which had been previously suppressed by the small number of rats and fleas and large rainfalls. The plague first hits the lower castes in Madras. This is initially met with indifference or contempt by both British officials and the upper caste elites, allowing it to spread rapidly. Things start to change when during cleansing rituals, or prayaschita, the normally separated lower castes suddenly swarm temples, seeking to rid themselves of what they fear is too much pollution spreading among them. This inadvertently causes the disease to spread to the upper castes, despite their separation rituals. In temples like Parthasarathi, swarms of infected lower castes overwhelm the courtyards, with a few breaching the temple itself. Once a few of the upper caste Indians get infected, they quickly spread it among the rest of the Madras population. This turns the situation from a lower caste outbreak into a catastrophic epidemic. British officials are soon forced to enact quarantine measures to slow the spread, but by now it is too late. To further complicate things, the water systems are contaminated and become vectors of transmission as well, affecting everyone in the city. Nonetheless, the British continue forward, though with immense resistance from the locals, as many quarantine measures include putting upper and lower caste Indians together in a localized area. Many Indians simply ignore these protocols and instead attempt to conduct more prayaschita rituals, which only exacerbates the spread as people once again swarm the temples in large groups. The plague also begins to spread to Hyderabad, having been transmitted via the British sepoys initially stationed in Madras. Once again, the spread starts among the lower caste Indians, spreading to poorer Muslims, who then transmit it up the social ladder and eventually reach the ruling Muslim elite of Hyderabad before reaching the upper caste populations. The delay in symptoms, about a few days asymptomatic, makes the spread all the quicker. When attempting to quarantine or separate the infected, many who show no symptoms are put with the healthier portions of the population, continuing the spread of the plague without anyone knowing. Dispatches are urgently sent to Calcutta by the British officials in Madras, warning them of the plague and requesting aid. When Wellesley receives the news, he springs to action, preparing a force of sepoys and British troops to go and help contain the situation down south. However, as preparations are being made, reports begin to flood in about outbreaks in Calcutta. Calcutta, being denser than Madras or Hyderabad, would see the plague spread far more quickly, forcing Wellesley to call off the troop deployments and focus on quarantine efforts in Calcutta. While the British handle the plague quite well, due to their previous exposures and self-segregation from the general Indian population, they are still somewhat impacted, with a mortality rate of around 10 to 20%, and severely limiting their ability to maintain the crisis. The larger and more compact population of the subcontinent in this alternate timeline helps to facilitate the spread of the plague, so that by the time Wellesley has sent a dispatch to London regarding the matter, the plague has already reached the Indian states not part of the British holdings. Back in Madras, the British would remain in the city, walling themselves off while attempting to maintain order. Meanwhile, in coastal towns south of Madras, such as Pondicherry, where the plague has quickly spread to, the French controlling the city would be unwilling to deal with the crisis at hand. Their ships would depart, with French and French-aligned merchants aboard, while desperate Indian residents of the city would be scrambling to get on the ships. Word of the plague and the apocalyptic devastation it was bringing would reach the courts of the other powerful Indian states. In the south, the Sultan of Mysore, Tipu Sultan, would attempt to shut the gates of his major cities and enact quarantine measures. However, with the plague already ravaging his neighbors around him, it is inconceivable to imagine that he would succeed in this effort, as many infected travelers and refugees would have already spread the plague before he would even know what was going on. By December, the Mysore capital of Seringapatam is hit hard, with Tipu having succumbed to the plague himself. This would leave a power vacuum in a state that badly needed strong leadership, as Tipu had at least 12 male heirs and multiple factions in his court, ready to turn on each other once he passes away. This lack of leadership in Mysore and looming civil war would exacerbate the spread of the plague, likely causing some cities to get hit multiple times. In the north, the Maratha Confederacy would hear about the news of the plague long before it reaches their borders, prompting them to act accordingly. They would restrict travel and attempt to quarantine anyone showing symptoms of the plague. This would, in effect, work to only delay the inevitable. While the subcontinent has had its fair share of outbreaks, the Black Death is something the feudal-like Indian states have yet to experience. In our timeline, when outbreaks did occur under British India, disease still spread rapidly, despite centralized authority, vaccines, and quarantine efforts. This alternate timeline has a decentralized, feudal, and competing Indian states trying to manage a far more devastating and infectious outbreak with less advancements in medicine. When London receives news of the catastrophic events unfolding in India, it would catch the public's attention immediately, though it would likely take until 1799 or 1800 for news to fully reach London on the state of things. When it does arrive, London would act swiftly. Quarantine efforts would be enacted to prevent Indian trade from theoretically infecting the island. The EIC would receive some necessary bailouts, though debates would rage regarding the necessity of its monopoly. With the looming threat of revolutionary France and the rise of Napoleon underway in Europe, London's attention would ultimately be focused away from India, prompting Prime Minister Pitt and EIC Director Sir Stephen Lushington to send a basic amount of troops and supplies to the Earl of Mornington so he can maintain order on the British-held territories of the subcontinent. They would also grant him a blank check, allowing him to do as he pleases to maintain control and keep the EIC profits going. When Wellesley is to receive these troops and supplies, as well as the blank check orders, the plague would have already started to impact the Maratha Confederacy, with recurring outbreaks going on in Hyderabad and Mysore. Wellesley initially focuses on quarantine efforts, with any sort of conquest goals he had previously planned being forced to take a back seat. For the first few years of his governor-generalship, he is forced to deal with the unstoppable plague. The plague devastates Bengal in particular, thanks to the overwhelming prevalence of the more deadly pneumonic plague versus bubonic. Combined with the famines of the early 1800s and recurring waves of outbreaks, by 1802, the population of Bengal has shrunk by more than 90%, or less than 5 million people remaining from an original population of around 52 million. This grim reality leaves an irreversible mark on the people there, forever haunting them of the Black Death in ways that will be felt for centuries to come. While the human toll and suffering have been devastating, or continue to be so in certain areas of India, for Wellesley, the biggest impact he has to deal with is the economic. With the region practically wiped out, there aren't enough exports or taxes to keep things going. Faced with this reality, Wellesley, in a stunning move, but one born of desperation and a new sense of his reformist ideology, sends a request to London to make Bengal open for British immigration. He needed to have a source of revenue and manpower if Britain was to maintain their hold on the Indian territories. But it wasn't going to come from India. They were losing too many people. On the heels of losing their American colonies a few decades back, Wellesley was to inadvertently turn India into another land of opportunity for European immigrants. Now that we have reached the end of this video, I would like to take a minute to introduce you to my book series. It's called the Broken Mantle series, a metaphor for an empire's power being broken and the aftermath of it. It takes place 1,000 years in the future, in the western part of what was once the United States. The setting is during an ice age, induced by a global nuclear war 1,000 years before the series takes place, with technology similar to the Roman Republic in its last century before the Empire. The plot of the series is where 8 main characters from the various nations in the series influence the outcome of a great continental war, with only one surviving at the end. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this series. More videos on the British conquest of plague-weakened India are to come soon. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content.